for the first time in America's history, a foreign airbase will be built on American soil. Qatari Air Force Base to be established in the US, an example of security partnership between the countries. The defense ministers, or the Secretary of War, as he calls himself in the United States, with the Qatari defense minister, they had a joint press conference during which Pete Hegseth was telling his Qatari counterpart that, they support what Qatar's done, especially after the unfolding events, their immense efforts in what happened inside of the Gaza Strip as well, showing a lot of support and solidarity. Of course, both of them had this agreement after Israel attacked. Netanyahu was forced to call and apologize. And now, whether you want to call it symbolic or non-symbolic, Qatar, the small, tiny country, is going to be the first country on earth to have its own airbase inside of the United States. Whether it's symbolic, whether it's not symbolic, this is something very significant. Whether they paid lots of money, whatever it is, At the end of the day, when we want to talk about like money and lobby, we know how Israel, for example, has a lot of control in the United States lobbying, right? And they have a lot of money. There are a lot of people, from within that group who influence, who buy politicians, blackmailing networks. They find their way, and many people can be bribed very easily with, sometimes not a lot of money, sometimes heavy sums. Qatar, however, having an official airbase inside of the United States, this is showing, number one, the United States giving Qatar a very important position. If, according to the recent statements and also the confirmations too, like Donald Trump was hailing Turkey and Egypt and Qatar so much in the last couple of weeks, likewise with Steve Witkoff and other American officials too, did they actually change the equation in the level of influence on the United States, especially after Benjamin Netanyahu really pushed the boundaries with the American president and pushed it for really, really long? Is something finally changing there? Listen, in Hebrew media, they're saying, we know we have Jewish money, but the Arabs now have more money and they're less demanding than Netanyahu. This is what Hebrew media is saying. They know themselves very well. But according to them, the Arabs are not going to try and suck in everything from a country that they're allied with in the form of the United States. Therefore, President Trump would feel more comfortable with allies like the Arab and the Muslim states instead of Benjamin Netanyahu and the state of Israel. Again, not to say that all of a sudden Trump is going to ditch Israel or anything. But if that White House official and what he stated before in one of the previous reports in Washington Post and other mainstream media outlets, that without us, Israel doesn't exist, and Netanyahu was clever enough to understand not to push Donald Trump too much, if all of these are proving to be true, then we are really talking about a new beginning. And the Americans are saying now we're talking about a peace deal rather than a ceasefire. And again, everything is volatile. Everything can collapse. We have tested this administration. It has facilitated and supported the genocide fully for the past 2 years. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump, he likes to be in the club of winners. When Benjamin Netanyahu had this attack on Qatar, another ally, a big ally that now has a base in the United States, and that mission failed, Donald Trump got upset. If that mission succeeded, Donald Trump could have potentially endorsed it because he knew about it. And like he endorsed their initial attack on Iran and then followed up with this theatrical attack to take Netanyahu out of the equation, let him climb down the ladder and have this ceasefire unilaterally. Now he wasn't very happy because it didn't succeed. And from a Trump perspective, I don't want to be surrounded by losers. I want to be in the winner camp. And that winner camp here, they showed him we're willing to invest, willing to cooperation with you, but you need to stop Netanyahu. Did the lobbying work this time? or did it not work? Did Netanyahu understand that he reached his limit, or did he not? What is going to happen inside of the Gaza Strip? Are things going to move on, or are things not going to move on? Before we go into that, clearly what's happening between Qatar and the United States is a huge shift forward, regardless of the fact whether the ceasefire succeeds or not. But in relation to the ceasefire success or a failure, there are multiple ways to weigh things down here. Firstly, we have a situation where the American administration had certain measures taken against Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu to apply pressure and reach a ceasefire by also allowing countries that Israel didn't want in the negotiation process, like Turkey, who backs Hamas clearly and visibly and publicly, and as a matter of fact, shames European countries for labeling Hamas. Then that in return added more pressure on Israel. Israel wants to portray this for internal purposes and internal consumption purposes as misinformation, and no, they are actually applying pressure on Hamas. Of course, these countries will have leverage on Hamas to an extent, but Hamas as a resistance movement, it's not by itself, it's with other movements too, and it also doesn't make decisions on its own. It has consultations with other countries too. And when we had previous reports during the peak of the genocide, when there were reports of pressure, Hamas didn't back down with certain limits or national rights of the Palestinian people that they don't have the authority to actually even cross. That created another pressure element on Netanyahu, and like what the Turkish foreign minister said, less room for maneuverability from Benjamin Netanyahu. But although the ceasefire agreement actually is in place now, effectively, there are several things. The indications that have positivity in them, that this will somehow last, are as follows. Israel withdrew, some of its forces withdrew completely from the Gaza Strip, not just to these lines. All of the Palestinians who wanted to return north returned, north and south going back and forth. Aid is going in. Egypt is already rebuilding camps, of course, temporary housing in central Gaza, and the deal has been signed. Clearly, there's more pressure from Trump, who's supposed to be arriving to sign a finalized deal, and they're talking about peace and everlasting peace and all of these things. Okay, that's number one. Then, of course, the things that are happening in the United States and how close they're getting with some of the countries that have increasingly started to support the Palestinian side more and more. There is no undermining of any of the efforts that the Turkish, Egyptian, and Qatari side have done to try and reach a ceasefire. All of them have done a lot to try and apply pressure to reach a ceasefire agreement. Whether you have, criticism of their foreign policy or lack of support or more action, that's a separate story. But in relation to the actual ceasefire, some of them worked day and night to try and make it work. And in the form of Qatar, despite the fact that they have been attacked directly by Israel, and they really just wanted to call it a day and say, we don't want to get involved in this. But they still found an opportunity. They came, they had a deal, because from their perspective, as their prime minister said, we want a deal, one ending of the war. Is the weight now of these countries in the eyes of Donald Trump bigger than the weight of Israel? Is the United States finally realizing that this country and this lobby that has occupied the United States and many other governments across the world too, more of a liability than an actual blessing? Aren't they, or have they already seen that if that country or regime sinks, they take down everyone who stood with them? Or are they trying to play something to prolong their existence altogether? What's for sure is there is a huge geopolitical and dynamic shift happening in the region. The coming days are going to prove to be very sensitive. Why? Because here's the negative part. Number one, there are still problems in relation to the names of those who will be released. The Palestinian side included certain names that Israel traditionally had a veto on, in a hope that they will succeed eventually. Israel is still insisting not to release some of these names. Will the Palestinian side insist on them, or will they say it's not worth it to stop the whole deal for these 5 names? Nail al-Barghouthi, who was the longest serving Palestinian prisoner who was released, said when he was released, I wouldn't have chosen this to be released, as in the sacrifice. Not, of course, criticizing the resistance or anything as such, but as in the cost that the Palestinians paid for this operation to release the prisoners, and this genocide and this barbarity from Israel against the Palestinians. He said that not that I believe that it was worth the blood of the people for me to be released. Therefore, that is indicating that these prisoners, even, they know very well that they are willing to sacrifice with their time even for what's better for the general good of the Palestinian people, which indicates that there might be some compromise there in relation to certain names. What that would do, though, is it would create a further excuse for the Palestinian resistance for future events to happen to release these people because of Israel's continued veto to release them. At the end of the day, some of these people have administrative detention, illegally imprisoned, many of them too. And also, from an Israeli perspective, they knew very well that they had to go to wars to counter attacks by the Palestinian side, who always fought for the release of Palestinian prisoners. As a matter of fact, multiple statements came from the Palestinian resistance saying they're going to continue with all legitimate means to resist for freedom, for liberty, for the establishment of a Palestinian state, and there wouldn't be any giving up arms of the resistance unless it's for an independent and sovereign Palestinian state. Showing that this also, the other thing, the arms and disarmament is another thing that might pop up later on. So in effect, we're having a situation where there needs to be a finalized list. If there is no finalized list, or if the Palestinian resistance views what Israel is doing as unjustified and uses the momentum now with the desire, the supposed desire of the American administration to reach a ceasefire, the momentum and the backing that they're having from some of the Arab Muslim states now, Netanyahu being cornered to push for these last names, or will say, okay, we'll compromise, but we will release the prisoners of war, all of them. Secondly, will they release some of the prisoners of war and leave some for these names to be released? We already heard that the Palestinian side wouldn't be releasing a third of the bodies because they don't know their whereabouts. Chances are they might still be in locations that where Israel is still present at, in parts of the Gaza Strip. That's during the first phase. The second phase, the negotiation is still ongoing. It hasn't ended. The second phase is going to talk about the force, the disarmament, what's going to happen in the future. Netanyahu and Israel can add more hurdles in that stage. But if they have the prisoners of war, the whole excuse that they use to conduct a genocide by even killing their own people like they did, massacring them on the 7th of October and targeting the prisoners of war, killing over a third in total, they will not have that excuse. The Palestinian side would be removing this excuse from Netanyahu. And Israel proved by its genocide in Gaza that this card, and that could be another reason why the Palestinian side went into an agreement now, started to become less and less valuable as time went by. Because Israel started to clearly say by ministers in Netanyahu's government that it doesn't matter if some of them die for the national interest of Israel. Therefore, there was a calculated and strategic decision-making here from the Palestinian side, capitalizing on the opportunity that Donald Trump wanted this to happen very quickly, more hostility from Israel against other Arab nations, feeling more panic, and also having more persistence to get this over and done with. Otherwise, it would be Netanyahu would probably target more countries too, and they didn't want any of it. Some of the countries didn't want to have like any involvement too. And they capitalized on that moment. Then Israel, of course, internationally, it's going to be in an even worse position, because now they don't even have an excuse. People tell them, well, you got your prisoners of war back. What are you happening? Oh, we're preventing another attack. That's going to be much weaker. Because although they were milking this hostage excuse, when we knew very well that they didn't care about any of them, because if they did, they would have had a deal from day one, because Hamas offered them a deal from day one. Release our prisoners, will release all of your prisoners. End of. Israel continued this genocide, hoping that it would make the Palestinians surrender, only for the Palestinian people to emerge victorious after unbelievable heroism and persistence inside of the Gaza Strip, not leaving their land, not giving up their arms, not giving up their national rights, and not introducing a new mandate in the form of a war criminal called Tony Blair. So there are positivities and there are negative elements here. The introduction of the ceasefire, the implementation of it so far is taking place. It has taken effect. Israel is moving back. The Palestinians are getting aid. They are moving to areas where Israel strategically wanted to ethnically cleanse them from. And there are things on the ground that are preparing for more participation from other countries too, like this international stabilization force is primarily going to be made up of Egyptian, Turkish, and Qatari forces. That's something that's going to be, it's going to make it far more difficult for Israel to conduct any future attacks against Gaza, because it would put them in a very difficult position. The Turkish president just told Israel, if the genocide or elements of the genocide restart, they're going to be paying a very heavy price. I know it's still talk, and he has made several statements before, but also that could be indicating that the certain agreements that they have now, the guarantees and the assurances that are supposed to be protected by the mediators and the United States too, who will have a joint room, by the way, to monitor the ceasefire and its implementation, can actually have a much larger impact. Because again, let's not forget, 2 to 3 months ago, this wasn't the tone. 1 year ago, this wasn't the tone. Netanyahu said he wouldn't stop the war unless Hamas is eliminated and release all of the prisoners of war without any condition. The ethnic cleansing campaign, that's it. They can completely forget about that. And the rebuilding. All of these were the hidden but genuine, real agenda. Well, not so hidden, because some of them actually declared it, of Israel, ethnically cleansing the Palestinian people, expulsion, and murdering them, those who remain. Now all of that is out of the question. The military was getting a beating up until the last second. Minutes before the ceasefire took effect, the Palestinian resistance sniped a genocidal terrorist as he was withdrawing from Gaza. And the resistance had severe attacks against them in the recent days. They were fleeing from them. They weren't capable. And that damage that happened to the Israeli army, that's going to take years, if not even decades, to even try and recover from. Because for some people, there is no going back. There is no going back to this genocidal army. There is no Israel from many people's perspective too. The Israeli public completely lost trust in their military and in their security and in their political leadership as well. Israel lost its image. It has been tarnished globally. And although we're seeing an ending of this current round so far, or the ceasefire, this is not the end of the battle. There is still a genocidal terrorist entity, a terrorist regime, a wanted war criminal, a country that has committed war crimes, still capable of conducting them, so long as no genuine severe measures are taken against them to stop any of their aggressions or future aggressions. That's in summary the latest that is happening. So the situation is volatile. There are reasons to believe that things can actually, there is potential to go ahead with this, and this being a lasting ceasefire, but that wouldn't necessarily end the battle, by the way. That's a different story. And there are other indications too that there are some certain loopholes that Netanyahu might try and play with to potentially restart the genocide, especially with some publications in the Israeli media, especially the Israeli Broadcasting Authority, that the two sides signed different agreements. that the Israeli side signed an agreement with the delegation, and the Palestinian side had a different agreement or different paper to sign with the mediators. According to Israeli media, they did it because they don't sign the same documents as Hamas, which is a pile of garbage, because Israel previously asked for direct meeting with Hamas delegations and Hamas refused. But this might show that the mediators tried to reach these formulas to bridge the gap and actually make it happen, to get the ball rolling, because according to them, if you do get the ball rolling, you will even create a bigger momentum to continue down the ceasefire, especially after all of this pressure started to accumulate against Israel.